Hello everyone, and thanks again for joining us for this Friday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm Dave Percy, meteorologist with the National Weather Service, and I'll be hosting today's show. Up first here on the hazardous weather graphic, we've got, starting up here in the north, a winter weather advisory out for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast here, expecting 2 to 4 inches of snow to fall in these areas starting later tonight and through tomorrow with gusty east-northeast winds. That'll reduce visibilities and due to blowing snow conditions in those areas again later tonight and through tomorrow. Otherwise, there's now a high wind warning out for the Alaska Range west of the Toke Cutoff, and that's out until about the, well, through tonight and tomorrow morning in the along the Alaska Range here, and that's for gusts from the south as high as 70 miles per hour. Then on the front side there, that yellow strip, that's still the wind advisory for gusts 40 to 50 miles an hour. Still have a flood advisory out for this evening, and then it's due to end for Antioch due to some minor flooding going on there. And then the flood watch continues out there for the Yukon River on the lower and upper Calskag due to the ice jam that's pretty much in place in the area there, and watching as the breakup front comes down river, whether that'll hold or not. So the potential is still there for some flooding. That's out tonight through tomorrow. And moving on to the breakup map here, can see, of course, Tanana mostly open through this stretch, and some open all the way down, of course, past Tanana, where the tripod fell on the 1st of May, but still pretty well iced up downstream from there and up here to the north. And breakup expected to begin early next week here along the Yukon River there around Eagle. But of course, that'll be later on for the Porcupine River. And seeing some open water now along the Susitna rivers, both the Little Sioux, as well as the Little Susitna River areas. Now on to satellite imagery. You can see the storm system affecting the area, bringing the strong winds and some cases heavy rains here, especially along the North Gulf Coast. That system stands out quite vividly here with the low center right in this area there, back edge of the front, coming across Kodiak Island, where they picked up roughly ½ inch of rain with that system since midnight. Total was higher than that. Heavy rains developing here along the North Gulf Coast, with Portage seeing since midnight 2 inches of rain, and Yakutat had upwards of 1.5 inches of rain, and the Seward area had 1 2/3 inches of rain. And to go along with that 2 inches of rain that fell at Seward, they had gusts out of the east up to 70 miles an hour today, with strong winds across areas of especially south central Alaska. Again, gusts 70 at Portage. Palmer had gusts 45 miles an hour and gusts of up to 50 to 70 miles an hour along the upper Anchorage hillside. And Turnagain Arm today, again, especially like Glen Alps and those areas. So the upper hillside saw the strongest winds, but 30 to 40 mile an hour winds getting down into the lower elevations of the Anchorage Bowl in areas mostly along Turnagain Arm over West Anchorage. And back out to the west here, windy and rain and snow falling over much of the southwest interior. Winds 25 to 45 miles an hour. Sparravon had a gust close to 50 miles an hour, and moisture spreading northward. Still dry area there over the eastern Brooks Range area, but light snow occurring over the eastern northeastern Beaufort Sea coast. Cold north winds gusting over 50 miles an hour there in the Pribilof Islands, with snow showers there, and then sweeping down from the northwest across the eastern Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula. Conditions improve, and showers become definitely more isolated with lighter winds out over the central western Aleutians. But again, that cold air coming southward in the backside of this low, which is lifting northward, We'll continue into this evening here, and rain and snow showers likely through this evening, gusty winds for the eastern Aleutians. Otherwise, front now by Kodiak, rain changing to showers there, maybe some clearing off to the southwest with mostly rain here in northeast Bristol Bay, rain and snow back to the west there with a narrow band of snow here this afternoon. Along the Yukon Delta coast, possibly down to Macoriac, some light snow, gusty north winds for the St. Lawrence Island area and Bering Strait, and then the light snow that'll be increasing tonight over the eastern Arctic coast, and again rain all the way over into the Juneau area there this afternoon and to the north with just scattered showers down to the south. For tonight, that front shifts eastward here as the low crosses 60 north. The front will be east of Anchorage, so that won't be a strong wind producer than we had, like we had last week, where the front was west of the area when the low center crossed 60 north. So still be quite windy and still looking for some heavy rain, as much as 6 to 8 inches of rain total expected to fall in Yakutat through Saturday evening. The warm front, again, heaviest rain over the northern panhandle tonight, scattered showers down to the south. Front lifts northward quite rapidly up to the Brooks Range there. North of the Alaska Range, really just dry with not much, all the moisture staying south of the mountains there, along and south of the mountains. Numerous rain and snow showers, or just a widespread area of light rain and snow here over the southwest interior, back along and north of the Alaska Peninsula. Snow showers over the northern Bering Sea mixing with rain as they head south. And winds beginning to lighten up there for the Alaska Peninsula. I'll continue to tomorrow as the low continues to drift northward to Norton Sound with still cold air coming down just along the coast, so snowfall levels will be near sea level here along the Yukon Delta coast. Mixed rain and snow of this trough as it advances eastward across Bristol Bay and the Kuskokwim Valley. Best chance of rain and snow. Should get a pretty good shot there in the McGrath-Nikolai area. And the rain changes slowly over to showers, becoming lighter and again more showery here for the North Gulf Coast areas. And rain will be decreasing there around the eastern North Gulf Coast areas, Elfin Cove to Yakutat, slowly ending the heavy rainfall, becoming more moderate into the afternoon, and still scattered showers down to the south there in spite of the high pressure over Dixon entrance, although the extreme southern southeast coast there could be mostly dry through the day tomorrow. And then for the outlook on Monday, much nicer here over the Panhandle, highs in the lower 60s over the southern southeast coast. Warm front moisture, though, streaming northeastward. That's going to bring a chance of rain into the coast from Elfin Cove on down to maybe Sitka late in the afternoon. Probably won't be until evening that more steady light rain works in. Another trough keeps it unsettled here, south central Alaska and the North Gulf Coast. And a cold air mass in over the Yukon Kuskokwim Delta. So snowfall levels right down to sea level even through the afternoon with scattered snow showers there. Not much in the way of accumulation. Accumulations will be up here to the north with snow ending on the eastern Arctic coast, but along the Brooks Range, especially back here to the north and northwest, best chance of snow. So you could see a couple inches there on down across St. Lawrence Island. Big storm entering the western Bering Sea there late Saturday night and into Sunday here, with the front advancing eastward with pretty strong winds. Possible storm force winds in advance of that front, reaching the eastern Aleutians, maybe 50 knots, more likely 40 to 45 knots, with strong winds also on the backside of that system wrapping around in from the northeast, so probably 40 to 45 knot northeasterlies for the western Aleutians. Under the low center, lighter winds, but a widespread area of rain. Definitely a big load of moisture coming up with this system along with the wind. And for the lows tonight, anywhere from 5 to 10, maybe 12 above here for the Arctic coast north slope, into the teens, 20s to lower 30s south side of the mountains there of Brooks Range. Lower in the 30s, above freezing in some locations over the Tanana Valley. Same thing, mid to upper 30s all the way down to the southwest coast. A little closer to freezing there for Macoriac. St. Paul, low 30, 24 for Savunga. Lower to mid 30s, Alaska Peninsula, mid 30s for the Aleutians. And then the lows for the southeast coast, not too bad really, mostly in the upper 40s with highs for tomorrow afternoon looking lower to mid 50s in the south, lower 50s in the north there, lower 50s Tanana Valley in the upper Yukon. A shade below 20 for the Arctic coast, otherwise 20s for the north slope. and 40s out here to the west, all the way down to the coast. And then you reach the mid to upper 30s there, upper 20s St. Lawrence Island, mid 30s over the Pribilofs, lower 40s for the Aleutians. And checking out the highs, oh, I'm sorry, the low temperatures for Sunday morning, looking like this, single numbers there, eastern Arctic coast, central coast as well, and then into the mid-20s there, Noatak Valley, Kotzebue, and those locations with upper 20s, lower 30s, Yukon Flats, with 30s for the southeast coast, and also lower 30s here for the Bristol Bay area, south central Alaska in the 30s once again, mid-30s for the Aleutians, Panhandle lows in the mid-40s, and then the highs into the lower 60s here. Could see 62, 3, maybe even 4 degrees down over the southern southeast coast. Sunshine and then increasing clouds will keep the coastal areas cooler, but even in the north they're approaching 60 degrees possibly toward Yakutat.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Looking at the flying weather graphics here, IFR widespread over the southwest part of the state, Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, and then a narrow band here northward crossing the Lotto Hills, eastern Seward Peninsula, across the Selawik Valley there, then widespread IFR Brooks Range on out to the most of the Arctic coast there, marginal on the east side. Marginal VFR, Bering Sea and the Aleutians, Kodiak Island. IFR breaking out here, southern Cook Inlet, northern Cook Inlet, all of Cook Inlet into the Susitna Valley. IFR though, North Gulf Coast mountains into the Wrangles, all the way down toward Dixon Entrance. Tomorrow afternoon stays IFR, Dixon Entrance all the way up across, all the way up to the passes there, and offshore. Narrower IFR, but persisting North Gulf Coast, and along the Alaska Range on the windward side of things. IFR pretty widespread now on the eastern Arctic coast, improving back to the west. VFR breaking out there along the northwest coast in the Noatak Valley. Otherwise, mostly marginal VFR over the west and southwest interior. Much of the Bering Sea, north side of the Alaska Peninsula. Looks like a VFR afternoon coming up for Alaska. And then for the Sunday morning, back into the marginal VFR there for the eastern Aleutians. A little bit of IFR out toward Amchitka Island, otherwise marginal for the Bering Sea into the southwest coast, IFR northeast Norton Sound, as well as the Brooks Range, Koyukuk Valley, looks like into the Kobuk Valley as well, IFR to start the day with Sunday. Eastern Arctic coast, IFR back to about Wainwright. IFR still hanging in there over the southeast coast and the North Gulf Coast, northern Prince William Sound, and the southern slopes of the central Alaska Range, also the eastern slopes of the western range. In the afternoon for Sunday, IFR now along and south of the Brooks Range into the Koyukuk, Kobuk Valley areas, marginal VFR elsewhere. VFR, Yukon Flats here, southwest, almost down the Yukon River there, but narrowing out toward Kuskokwim Bay where you get some marginal VFR up along the Alaska Range, southern Kuskokwim Valley. IFR, northern Prince William Sound, looks like Valdez, and that's about it. Otherwise, so improving here for the North Gulf Coast, southeast coast, all VFR in the forecast for Sunday afternoon from Dixon Entrance to Chilkoot and White Pass. Passes, Anaktuvik and Adigan, both IFR tomorrow. Lake Clark and Merrill, same forecast IFR. Marginal VFR for Rainy. Windy, marginal VFR south, VFR to the north. And Isabel, IFR becoming marginal. Mintasta, marginal VFR. Look for some improvement to VFR conditions. Tanita, I think it'll be optimistically VFR the entire day. Portage, IFR, gradual improvement in the afternoon. Chilkoot and White, IFR. Freezing levels, southwest jet, or southerly, mostly southerly, south-southwest into the Yakutat area there. Warm air to the east side of that, 8,000 feet coming up to about Heidelberg. And warm air surging into northwest Canada, 2,000 feet extending into the central interior areas, cooler out over the Bering Sea. As far as icing goes, some scattered mixed icing out here for the Pribilofs, down to the Alaska Peninsula, more widespread area of rime icing here over the west-southwest interior areas, also up along the north slope to the eastern Arctic coast. IFR could be considerably moderate here, northern panhandle over to maybe Cape Yakataga and the Wrangell Mountains. With that southerly jet, 140 knots, aimed right up into the eastern North Gulf Coast, mainly across Yakutat, and a deep trough down here, so pulling a lot of moisture from the southern latitudes right up into the Yakutat area, eastern North Gulf Coast, looking for all the rain, and jet just barely reaching the western Aleutians. 9,000 feet, low pressure tracking northward today down in this area. Tomorrow will be up eastern Norton Sound at about mid-afternoon. Southerly winds here, 20 knots around Prince William Sound, 40 knots along the Alaska Range up into the central interior, 25 to 30 over the northeast winds, 25 western Arctic coast. Sweeping down, but not all that strong, 20 to 25 knots, taking a turn to the west across the Alaska Peninsula, and pretty strong winds here across the Panhandle at 9,000 feet, 3,000 feet. Not quite as strong, but still a good flow right up into the northern southeast coast there, 35 to 40 knots, and 30 to 40 knots over the central interior, northwesterlies 20 to 25 over the Bering Sea, lighter toward the western Aleutians. Widespread moderate chop here in the reddish-orange shaded areas, Kodiak Island, Kuskokwim Valley, especially the Alaska Range up into the Tanana Valley and White Mountain areas, southeast coast, mainly the northern areas, and the western Arctic coast there. And improving, though, out over the Aleutians and the Bering Sea. And after the break, I'll be back with a look at the marine forecast and other interesting information.
Space weather affects technologies. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches to our customers so they can take action.
The Space Weather Prediction Center has had a long-standing relationship with the power industry, so they've been aware that solar storms, the geomagnetic storm piece of that, can affect the operation of their systems and induce extra currents and loads on those systems that can either trip those systems offline or in the worst of cases, cause damage. That relationship goes back for several decades. In fact, a big incident in 1989 where part of Quebec was tripped offline that affected something like 6 million customers for about 9 hours. I think that really raised the awareness in the power industries.
When we get the alert, we watch the grid and start looking for issues. Are we seeing a decline in voltage? Are we seeing equipment failures? And we readjust the system to try to mitigate those problems, try to keep the lights on and keep it from going out.
Averaging about 500, 550 kilometers per second.
If we didn't have this early warning, we wouldn't see it until our sensor saw it. Getting more information quicker and faster before the storm hits, not during the storm, is a big improvement.
In the long term, I think what we need and what we're moving toward, the U.S. as a whole, is better modeling, fully understanding this phenomenon, understanding how it would impact specific systems.
Rather than actually experiencing a storm, we can simulate storms in our software and see what the impact is. We try to get ahead of it. We always plan that if there's an outage, how can we keep the lights on? What's the best process to prevent it?
In the end, 5-10 years from now, there's going to be a whole mix of operational procedures driven by what we do on prediction and warning. And then there also will probably be some level of hardware controls to ensure the reliability of the grid.
Space weather affects technologies. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches to our customers so they can take action.
There's different types of impacts on communication systems, and the HF we call the high frequency, which is that band of communications 3 to 30 megahertz. But it's a very important band of radio communication because it's used widespread. It's used, for example, by the airlines.
HF radio is most commonly used for position reporting when you're going across the ocean airspace, which is devoid of radar. And ATC can't see you, so it's up to you to report your position and your altitude and your speed.
HF works great most of the time, except during a big flare. And during a big flare, that HF communication capability could be gone within a minute or two. So as soon as we see something happening in there and we see a flare, it's one of the first things we do is alert the aviation community, hey, big flare, HF's going to be impacted.
Once we know that there's an event going on, then the aviation industry and the airlines can react to that. They can alter their routes over the poles. They can lower the altitudes that they're flying at, or maybe decide not to fly at all in the interest of the passenger safety.
So that's just one example of how HF is used, but the emergency response community will use it a lot too. It's one of their primary backups.
When you've lost connectivity between certain government agencies, it gives you that long-range coverage to talk from out-of-state to federal governments or from the FEMA locations to the state emergency operations centers.
So if you've got a big hurricane impact in the coastline, whatever big city, we've got the cell towers down and whatnot, we've got emergency communication folks in there. Those folks are very familiar with space weather and how it impacts their systems.
Here in recent years, it was used during Katrina when we had a lot of communications outages down there. It was also used during Hurricane Ike. There was an outage of the telephone circuits with the Texas State Emergency Office, so it was used in both of those situations.
So when we talk about backup, especially for the airlines, typically they'll have SATCOM, so it'll be satellite communication.
The satellite technology that emergency responders use could be GPSs, could be satellite phones, satellite data terminals.
Space weather events can impact SATCOMs. The impact can range from a nuisance to loss of a spacecraft. So we will give them the heads up. If we have space weather events, flares, whatnot, they need to know what's impacting their systems. Situational awareness is key. Time is of essence to these folks. Again, it's life and death.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Looking at today's sea ice analysis. Again, this is the only ice left in the Bering Sea here, with a little bit there, not too much here along the southern coast of the Seward Peninsula, and the open areas here north of the Bering Strait and also off the western coast. Those still forecast to maybe close off a little bit with the north and northeast winds in the areas there. We'll push some of that back in over the area, but probably won't completely close these areas off through the first of next week. And looking at the coastal water forecasts for the Panhandle, looking mostly from the south, 20 to 25 knots here on the south coast, 7 to 9 foot seas, small craft advisories for the remainder of the coastline there, with seas as high as 12 feet and those 25 knot winds. Gales for Lynn Canal tomorrow, southeast 30, gust 45, Stevens Passage, southeast 20 for Clarence Strait. And then for Sunday, swing it around to the northwest, 15 to 20 knots here for the central and southern inside waters. Lynn Canal down a shade under gale force with 30 knot winds from the south, still pretty brisk. Northerlies 15 to 20 on the south coast and southerlies 15 on the north coast. And then very light winds, light and variable, say, for the eastern North Gulf Coast. And for Prince William Sound tomorrow, south 15, seas 3 feet. And 20 knots here for the eastern North Gulf Coast, but from the western coast here on down across the Barren Islands, south winds 25 with 11-foot seas. South winds 25, Kachemak Bay, southern Cook Inlet with seas 8 to 9 feet. 20 knot winds for the northern areas north of the Forelands. And then for Sunday, south 15 for Cook Inlet as well as Kachemak Bay, the Barren Islands, western North Gulf Coast, and down to 10 knots here for the eastern North Gulf Coast with still 8-foot seas. So still a small craft advisory there due to the higher seas. Southeast 10, pretty light now for Prince William Sound with slight seas. And for the east side of Kodiak Island, southwesterlies at 25 knots, and those extend to Sitkinak all the way down to Castle Cape. Shelikof Strait south at 20. And the Alaska Peninsula here, west winds 25 knots, southwest 25 for Bristol Bay. And for Kodiak Island, southwest 15, including Shelikof Strait, and that wind pattern all the way back to Castle Cape. And for the Alaska Peninsula, south winds 20 knots with seas 6 to 7 feet, 15 knot winds for Bristol Bay. For the Saturday forecast, western Aleutians, winds out of the west at 20 knots. and 20 to 25 knot winds over the central Aleutians, and then mostly 20 knots out of the west, with the seas running 8 to 12 feet in these areas, 7 to 8 feet out over the western Aleutians. Next, next storm comes rolling into the central Aleutians on Sunday here with the low center right about in this area. So southeast winds 35 to 40 knots here out ahead of the front there. Possible narrow band of storm force winds, not really in the forecast yet at this time. Gales behind the low center, 35, maybe 40 knots out of the northeast. And winds on the increase across the Fox Islands through the afternoon, probably reaching gale force toward late afternoon into Sunday evening. And for the southwest coast, west-northwest, 25 to 30 knots, north 30 for St. Lawrence Island. Pribilofs, northwest at 20, add 5 knots to that for small craft advisories for St. Matthew Island. And then for the outlook here for Sunday, Norton Sound, southwest 25, otherwise St. Lawrence Island, north of 20. Light southerlies here, north of Nunivak Island, south 15, south of Nunivak Island, southeast 25 with the Pribilofs, northeast for St. Matthew Island. East-northeasterlies, 30 knots. Again, winter weather advisory here for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast with those winds and the 2 to 4 inches of snow, blowing snow, reducing visibilities. 25 to 30 knot northeast winds here become gale force from Cape Beaufort on down to Wales for northeast 35. And then for Sunday, coming down a little bit there from Wales to Cape Thompson, north 25. Northeasterlies from Cape Thompson and on the west side, they're 25 to 30 knots. Central and east side, winds coming down east, 15, all the way over to demarcation point. And for tonight, low center drifts north over the Yukon Delta, rain and snow across all this area and down along the Alaska Peninsula. Winds start to diminish. Snow showers continue, though, for the Pribilofs, so, and pretty breezy for the Alaska Peninsula, eastern Aleutians. Heavy rain, especially this evening. North Gulf Coast, strong winds. Stays pretty windy all night long here for south central Alaska with possible gusts 40 to 50 miles an hour, maybe even higher gusts, higher elevations. North Gulf Coast, east side, looking for several inches of rain to fall around Yakutat tonight and tomorrow, and that snow on the increase for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast. And the wind warnings will end for the Alaska Range tomorrow by about 10 a.m. And for the otherwise, low pressure continues to weaken and move northward with snow in the northwest interior on Sunday and a big storm coming into the Bering Sea. Thank you for joining us.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.